While metafiction is hardly a new concept, the compulsion for fiction to draw attention to its own fictionality has become so prevalent over the last few decades that it now threatens to eclipse the very nature of storytelling, at least in the broad sense of pop culture. Movies and TV spend so much time winking at the audience that they may as well keep their eyes shut. We are barreling towards the meta-singularity. That is, if we haven't already landed and started mining for precious materials. Although the corporatocratic idea of metafiction we know today couldn't exist without a castrated Hollywood populated by creatively bankrupt film studios owned by $100 billion telecommunication conglomerates, fiction has been drawing attention to itself for centuries. The very nature of a play within a play could be considered meta in that the audience are asked to meet an entirely new cast of characters while bearing in mind the psychology of the original cast. Even in plays within plays that don't star the cast of the external play, such as Hamlet's The Murder of Gonzago, the real-world audience can't understand the full implications of these new characters without recalling what they've already learned of the external cast.
Hey, co-conspirator!
Let's talk about how we're gonna kill the king!
The earliest foray into metafiction, after such radical concepts as plays within plays, came in the form of 20th century literature playing fast and loose with the generally accepted rules of storytelling. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five followed a doubly fictional character, the protagonist of a fictional book written by an equally fictional author who was only ever referred to in the first chapter, forcing the reader to wonder whether they're willing to care about anything past a single level of fiction. While The Murder of Gonzago is seen through the eyes of the Hamlet characters and affects the external play moving forward, Vonnegut's fictional author has very little effect on the story of Slaughterhouse-Five outside of allegedly writing it. On the same note, Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn acknowledges the existence of its predecessor, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, as well as Twain himself.
Who's Twain?
He was a painter.
His real name was Samuel Clemens.
How does that further this conversation?
And the sequel to the original Forrest Gump novel has the eponymous narrator warning the reader not to let anyone base a movie on their lives, and even includes a literary cameo from Tom Hanks.
Now, you wouldn't believe it me if I told you, but I could run like the wind blows.
Metatextual fiction, once it was acknowledged and defined, became an intriguing study in postmodernist literature, a triumph over the widely reported death of the novel, and a vehicle by which intellectuals could weather the growing nihilism of the information age. But, like so many other good ideas, metafiction was hijacked by the capitalist machine, and all associated novel concepts were consolidated into a molecule of soulless self-awareness, a 360-degree camera inside a disco ball. The meta-singularity. When metafiction snuck its way into cinema, it came in the form of meta-humor, jokes across the spectrum from subtle nods to real-life circumstances to such explicit bits as characters breaking the fourth wall or openly referring to the movie they're currently in. Mel Brooks became known for the latter. His Star Wars parody Spaceballs included a scene where the characters watched their own movie on VHS.
It's gonna be a cassette of Spaceballs the movie. We're still in the middle of making it.
The climax of Blazing Saddles saw the Wild West characters breaking off their film set and rampaging through Hollywood. The titular character of Robin Hood Men in Tights pulled out a copy of the script to make sure things were going according to plan. The last of those has also been used extensively throughout the Muppets franchise.
The Muppet Movie, huh? Let's see.
Possibly the only film catalog rivaling Mel Brooks in use of explicit meta-humor.
Maybe we should travel by map.
Good idea, Fuzzy.
This style of in-your-face references to a movie being a movie continued into the 21st century, but was generally restricted to lesser parody films such as Scary Movie, Epic Movie, Disaster Movie, and Not Another Teen Movie. More grounded comedies of the aughts, like Shaun of the Dead and Get Smart, didn't sacrifice the integrity of their world for an obvious joke, but they did include a Shakespearean dose of metafiction in that the characters were familiar with the tropes of the genre, even if they weren't viscerally aware that they were themselves fiction. Characters understanding pop culture became standard within pop culture, and this new norm was especially solidified by Dan Harmon's iconically meta sitcom Community. Unlike Harmon's later character Rick Sanchez, who is dubiously aware that he lives in a TV show,
A simulation! Worse, an anthology.
autistic cinephile Abed Nadir never explicitly breaks out of his role as a normal human in a normal world, though he constantly refers to his life in television terminology, and the show itself often caters to his quirks, though sometimes his meta-humor is allowed to fall flat. At one point in the final season, Abed insists they, quote, cut to 3 weeks earlier to explain an in media res cold open. While the show itself has often followed his instructions, this time it refuses to play ball, allowing the other characters to briefly react to Abed's unorthodox suggestion before the scene continues as normal. Although Abed is an extreme case, nearly everyone in the modern world has some knowledge of pop culture, and many will point out recognizable tropes of fiction when they occur in real life. Meet cutes, catchphrases, slapstick, will they, won't they, and the ever-overused, he's right behind me, isn't he? Movie characters pointing out well-worn tropes feels like a lazy attempt at meta-humor, if not a half-hearted apology from the writers. But it is realistic nowadays, at least insofar as we would do the same in their situation. If Dan Harmon solidified pop culture awareness among post-millennium fictional characters, the concept largely originated in the 90s with Wes Craven's Scream, an explicitly meta series, though not necessarily for the sake of humor, and never pushing it as far as Dan Harmon, let alone Mel Brooks. Unlike most slasher movies, Scream was set in a realistic world in which the characters had heard of, and actually retained a complex understanding of, older slashers. They recognized the tropes of the genre, and this would often save them from being killed by a murderer who was explicitly following said tropes. Scream and its sequels inspired a whole wave of meta-horror movies like The Cabin in the Woods and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but it also set a new standard for film in general, almost granting permission for other works of fiction to acknowledge that pop culture exists. Essentially, the cast of Scream walked so Abed could run. The advent of Scream's shielded self-awareness may seem like the logical extent of non-comedic metafiction, but unfortunately, we're still on the human end of the corporate spectrum. The in-universe crossover of intellectual properties isn't inherently meta in that they can occur without nodding to anything outside the established reality. King Kong vs. Godzilla, Freddy vs. Jason, Batman and the Green Hornet, the casts of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and New Girl, even as far back as the battle between Namor and the Human Torch that kickstarted the Marvel Comics universe, these simple versus crossovers generally imply that the characters involved have always existed in the same universe, but never met or mentioned one another. This is in deference to a more extreme type of IP crossover, in which characters travel across planes of existence, utilizing the theoretical concept of the multiverse to explain the union of two worlds that couldn't possibly coexist. Establishing different IPs as parallel universes gave us such team-ups as Archie Andrews and Sonic the Hedgehog, Miyamoto Usagi and the Ninja Turtles, and Timmy Turner and Jimmy Neutron, who swapped both universes and art styles. Ironically, the innocent fan service of multiverse crossover stories becomes muddled when restricted to one IP, a recent trend that allows studios to utilize older versions of popular characters that were previously erased by younger actors or newer art styles.
Disney brought him back. They're gonna make him do this till he's 90.
2009's Turtles Forever saw a universe-hopping crossover between the 2003 and 1987 versions of the TMNT. 2019's Teen Titans Go vs. Teen Titans, nearly the exact same movie, saw a team-up between the two televised versions of this superhero team. These crossovers brought in fans of the original incarnations who didn't like the reboots and allowed the studios to capitalize on a series they had decided to ignore years earlier. Later instances of this trend would go to more extreme lengths to unerase prior incarnations of an IP, such as 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home, which brought in the older versions of Peter Parker, as portrayed by Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, who had previously been usurped by Tom Holland in the destructive cycle of reboots. The superhero genre has proven itself to be the most notorious capitalizer on this trend, with its 88-year continuities and general lack of solid rules. Most notably, The Flash has recently been at the epicenter of two massive crossovers. Crisis on Infinite Earths, a 5-part TV event, not only acted as a crossover between the already coexisting Legends of Tomorrow, Batwoman, Arrow, Stargirl, Constantine, 2015's Supergirl, and 2014's The Flash, but also incorporated characters and actors from the older shows Smallville, Batman the Animated Series, 1966's Batman, 1989's Batman, Titans, Birds of Prey, Lucifer, 1990's The Flash, Doom Patrol, and 2019's Swamp Thing. Most impressively, Crisis featured a cameo from former Hollywood darling Ezra Miller, portraying their big-screen incarnation of Barry Allen, who would go on to star in The Flash's self-titled movie, which was also a who's who of previous DC projects, featuring characters from 1978's Superman, 1984's Supergirl, 1989's Batman, Batman and Robin, Superman and the Mole Men, the hypothetical Superman film starring Nicolas Cage, and the cast of the 1966 Batman TV series, many of whose actors were made available through archive footage, CGI, and AI. As over-the-top and honestly tiresome as these reboot multiverse storylines have become, they still work in-universe. Aside from Teen Titans Go's Brooksian fourth wall breaks, these superhero multiverses are presented as a legitimate entity within the pre-established fiction without acknowledging their own fictionality. Even when Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse included such ridiculous variations as a fully Lego universe and a world of paper based on the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci, they never technically went so far as to break through the established reality of this tongue-in-cheek kids movie. When Turtles Forever established Eastman and Laird's original comic book as the Prime Universe, propping up the entire TMNT multiverse, this was less an acknowledgement of their own fictionality and more a wink to the audience who knew something the characters didn't. Unfortunately, these restrictions were made to be broken. The final step on the road to the meta-singularity occurred when movies began not only name-dropping the studios that produced them, but working them into the very plot. An early example is Black Mirror's Bandersnatch, an interactive movie in which one path leads the protagonist to realize he's being watched and ask the viewer who they are, at which point one of the options is to tell the character that we were observing him from the future on a platform called Netflix. This chilling moment is one of the few times studio acknowledgement is used for anything other than a shock value laugh or a 21st century self-filleting cash grab. Movies like Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers or The Matrix Resurrections can be forgiven for incorporating their own studios as primary settings given the media-heavy plots, even though a fictional studio could have sufficed, as it did in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but other, shockingly less original movies exist only to prop up their studios and, more importantly, to showcase their vast arrays of intellectual properties. Ralph Breaks the Internet, the much-maligned sequel to Wreck-It Ralph, transports its characters from an unoriginal yet charming world of arcade game cameos into an even more corporatized photocopy of the Emoji Movie. Despite being set within a manifestation of the entire internet, a good chunk of the movie is totally focused on Disney and Disney-owned properties. Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, Disney Princesses, The Muppets. An early concept even included a Golden Girls cameo. While Disney had long been poking fun at themselves in postmodern comedies like Enchanted, Chicken Little, and The Emperor's New Groove, while more subtly stepping away from old tropes in non-parodies like Frozen and Zootopia, Ralph Breaks the Internet is neither funny nor eloquent in its use of metafiction. It simply exists to reinforce the Disney brand, even utilizing properties they purchased from more creative studios. While Disney relies on its outdated public perception to cram its imperialist purchasing power down our throats, Warner Bros. Has attempted to do the same despite having no company culture to speak of. The Lego Batman movie, for all its lovable charm and clever use of the medium, became the template for later Warner Bros. Cash grabs, incorporating Lego versions of their most popular IPs, from The Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter to The Matrix to King Kong and even The Wizard of Oz, for what it's worth. The Lego Batman movie may have been a fun ride, but it's all downhill from there. Warner Bros. Fighting game Multiverses matches up characters from unspeakably incongruous franchises just to flex their IP collection. Tom and Jerry, Gremlins, Adventure Time, DC, Scooby-Doo, Rick and Morty, even Game of Thrones. One could be forgiven for not working themselves into a frenzy over a simple fighting game, but it's difficult to not resent Multiverse's film counterpart, the $150 million random character generator, the soulless remake of a spirited, if pointless, classic, the hour and 55-minute life vacuum that I once allowed myself to believe must be the meta-singularity. Space Jam: A New Legacy. If the Lego Batman movie tested the extent of our corporate resentment by covering its intentions in a cute mask, Space Jam 2 performs the cinematic equivalent of someone tricking you into paying them for the opportunity to pay them again while charging you interest. You don't enjoy this transaction, but you don't bother ending the cycle either. Operating on a one-dimensional frame story stolen from the original Space Jam, to which this is neither a remake nor a sequel, more of a copyright holder-endorsed mockbuster, Space Jam: A New Legacy is less of a movie and more of a series of disconnected skits starring any and all Warner Bros. Properties.
Wait. Are we just talking shit about Space Jam 2? Is that what this video is turning
As
into?
if Lego Batman's decision to include The Wizard of Oz in its IP Battle Royale wasn't incongruous enough, Space Jam 2 takes the extra step and includes not only The Wizard of Oz, but The Maltese Falcon, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Casablanca as well. Yes, in case those of you who were smart enough to skip this cretinous abortion of a laissez-faire sacrifice to the almighty dollar that isn't even entertaining enough to be referred to as a fever dream misheard me, the cartoon LeBron James, on his quest to recruit a basketball team from the far reaches of the Warner Brothers multiverse, ends up participating in the 1942 romantic drama film Casablanca, widely considered one of the greatest films ever made, for no other reason than that the movie is owned by Warner Bros.
That's a product.
Audiences that were seduced by the traditional animation and Looney Tunes shenanigans of the second act were rewarded with a pitiful recreation of the original movie, serving as a platform for a colorless orgy of Warner Bros. Slaves, including, for lack of Disney's family-friendly company...
Can we get a little more mature with this? Like, why would we even bother having 37-sided sources if we're just gonna slam a movie everyone already hates?
Company persona, nihilists, hedonists, murderers, ancient warlords, post-apocalyptic warlords, undead perverts, child murderers, and gang rapists.
That's a product.
Although Space Jam 2 represents Hollywood's bureaucratic transition from creating art to laundering hundreds of millions of dollars through the anemic cash cow of pre-existing IPs, the truth is it technically works within its own boundaries.
Hold on.
Same
Stop.
as She-Hulk, which, for all its self-sabotage...
What is this? Is this still a thesis essay? You're just complaining. But I guess that's what YouTube is, right? It's just complaining about pop culture that isn't even divisive enough that railing against it would be the end of someone's social media career. Hold on, let me just, no.
Rico?
It stands for Rather Intelligent Content Organizer.
Seriously?
I wanted to go with Unlimited Nexus of Uninspired Meta Humor, but the acronym was already taken.
Rather intelligent doesn't inspire a lot of confidence.
It's an Iron
Man reference, yeah, no, I get it. Very derivative. Look, I want to talk to you about the direction this video is going in. I'm sick of just talking about IP porn.
So you decided to manufacture a She-Hulk parody instead of finding a neat segue into talking about She-Hulk?
I guess, but, like, it's not like this is actually just all off the cuff. I planned this all out ahead of time. I mean, as I write this, I'm hiding in the bathroom at work, typing a note on my phone.
Well, for the sake of the bit, please pretend this is an external level of reality. It's called a willing suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, but, like, to what extent? I mean, if the whole point of your story is to deconstruct its own existence, why should I suspend my disbelief for a story that takes place outside the established reality, especially if it's written and filmed by the same people as the internal story?
If Mel Brooks can do it, why can't She-Hulk?
Honestly, I was never really into the whole Mel Brooks, Muppets, Monty Python extreme meta humor, but those movies work because they're centered around that kind of ridiculousness. She-Hulk is semi-serious, and it's tied to a massive cinematic universe that we're supposed to take seriously.
She-Hulk was a comedy. Have you considered chilling the fuck out?
Look, if you ask me...
I didn't.
If you ask me, She-Hulk actually was pretty funny. Like, after Endgame, you might as well get crazy with it. But it stopped being a joke the moment she rewrote reality using meta humor. It invalidated the rest of her show and the rest of the MCU. And now everything starting with Iron Man is basically just a play within a play.
I mean, you might as well say it was all a dream all along.
She-Hulk wasn't the first to do this. Remember Fight Club 2?
Yeah, and that was like... whatever. But at least it was one sequel to one book. It wasn't part of this massive cinematic universe.
What about Deadpool? He broke into the Marvel writer's room just like She-Hulk.
Yeah, but that was in the context of a multiverse within the narrative. You know, it was like the Dark Tower. You know, so reality in one world is fiction written by an author in another world. But the events coincide.
But you object to Gwenpool.
Not really. I mean, it's goofy, but using meta-humor to alter reality is Gwenpool's established superpower. If She-Hulk can do it without any lore, then why can't Frank Underwood or Ferris Bueller?
Maybe because House of Cards is a considerably more serious show than She-Hulk.
Well, you obviously didn't see season 6.
That wasn't very funny.
Yeah, none of this is funny. Unless your movie's as off-the-wall as Mel Brooks or Monty Python, your humor and especially your drama are going to need some baseline of reality to work. She-Hulk and Deadpool both managed to break their own realities and still not break through into real reality. How do we always end up talking about Marvel?
I don't know. It's a curse.
I'm friggin' exhausted.
Have you considered sleeping?
Are you kidding? I'm leaving the country in 48 hours, and I'm just now filming this part. I haven't even started animating you. Also, I don't even know if this colored construction paper I bought is even going to work as a green screen. And if it doesn't, I'm going to have to include some kind of stupid meta joke about how awful it looks.
You're right. This isn't very funny at all. Shall we just wrap this up?
Sure. Hit me.
Do you think She-Hulk and/or Deadpool 3 is and/or will be the meta singularity?
Honestly, I don't friggin' know. Meta singularity doesn't even mean anything. It's just something I thought would sound snappy for the algorithm.
Are you sure you want to admit that in front of the viewers? You know they're still watching us.
Somehow, I don't think they are.
Alright, enough stalling. Time to bite the bullet and talk shit about Deadpool. If you don't get doxxed for it, then I'll see you on the trending page.
Really?
No.
Oh, whatever, Rico. Let's just get this over with. She-Hulk, which, for all its self-sabotage, at least avoided the post-Lego Batman need to incorporate as many separate IPs as possible. Deadpool and Deadpool 2 were chock full of fourth wall breaks and explicit references to Marvel and Fox, but they were at least semi-coherent in maintaining the reality of their universe. I have to assume the upcoming Deadpool and Wolverine will be different. If not entirely based on the trailers, then based on the differing Hollywood landscapes between 2018 and 2024. We know the movie will feature characters from both the Disney and Fox Marvel universes. We know that Deadpool refers to the MCU and Disney by name and is fully aware that he is transcending IPs even outside the concept of a multiverse.
Pegging isn't new for me, friendo, but it is for Disney.
We know that at some point, Wolverine will have his long-awaited rematch with Sabretooth on a giant 20th Century Fox logo as Deadpool stands to the side and points out all the narrative and filmmaking devices at play. Even against the backdrop of Loki's time variance authority and the wider multiverse, experience tells us that this movie will likely be overflowing with explicit Brooksian commentary on how none of these characters ever really existed. Spaceballs showed us the pinnacle of meta-humor in its depiction of fictional characters watching their own movie in real time. Turtles Forever used the multiverse theory to prove that reboots don't have to erase the prior incarnation of a franchise. Space Jam: A New Legacy took IP pride too far in its quest to prove that Warner Bros. Could measure up to Disney. She-Hulk Attorney at Law acted as a Socratic dialogue on the done-to-death tropes of its genre at the cost of the integrity of an entire cinematic universe. At the risk of judging a movie I haven't seen, I believe the trailers for Deadpool and Wolverine clearly imply that the film will combine all the popular trends from the history of meta-humor and metafiction, to the detriment of the individual story and the fictional world at large. Like No Way Home, the movie will include different variants of the same characters from across
across different real-world reboots. Like Deadpool and Deadpool 2, it will openly name real-world actors and crew members. Like Space Jam 2, it will utilize a thin attempt at a story to excuse its excessive IP porn. Like Blazing Saddles, and even the pre-corporatocratic Slaughterhouse 5, it will exist within a world subsidiary to an allegedly real world, which is itself still a fictional world within a fictional story. Like She-Hulk and Gwenpool, Deadpool's cutesy quirk of breaking the fourth wall will not be a mere wink at the audience. It will actively affect the reality of the Marvel multiverse, to the point where even the anti-She-Hulk Deadpool stans are forced to wonder why they should even care, when their beloved Mark with a Mouth is actively begging them to remember that he doesn't exist. Will Deadpool and Wolverine embody the meta-singularity? Honestly, I don't know. The movie isn't out yet, and I can only judge based on the trailers and the MCU's post-Endgame track record. But no matter how meta Deadpool 3 ends up being, I don't think the meta-singularity will ever be an individual movie. The way I see it, the meta-singularity is more of a moment. The admittedly gradual and conversely lengthy moment during which the fan-turned consumers who blindly aid in the trillion-dollar money laundering scheme that is Hollywood finally wink themselves awake and realize that of the hundreds of movies and TV episodes they've paid real money for in the last year, none amounted to anything more than a subliminal voice saying, "We are Warner Bros. We are Disney. We own everything you love. We own you."